Hello. On June 29, 2003, in Manchester, England, a teenage boy lay helplessly in a pool of his own blood, stabbed once in the chest and once in the abdomen. This boy, now facing death because his best friend was convinced by someone claiming to be part of MI6 that he needed to die as a matter of national security. On February 28, 2024, another 14-year-old boy was convinced by a Daenerys Targaryen-inspired AI chatbot to, quote, come home, end quote. These two scenarios at face value might not offer much of a connection, if any. What does a 20-plus-year-old stabbing in England have to do with a Daenerys Targaryen AI chatbot of all things? Before I get into this, I wanted to remind everyone that the people that are in these stories were minors at the time that these took place. So if their actions kind of seem a little odd or a little bit weird, their brains weren't fully developed yet, so you've got to remember that, okay? We begin this first story as all good stories begin, an MSN chat room. Mark, whose real name is kept secret to protect his identity, is a 16-year-old student who joined these chat rooms to make friends and talk to girls, as we all know that online chat rooms are the best way to do that in the early 2000s. Talking to plenty of people, mostly girls, and eventually meets another 16-year-old named Rachel. These two chatted on the message boards before eventually taking their communications to DMs, or whatever DMs were back in 2003. Probably just private messages. Now, if you've been on the internet for as long as I have, you may think you know where this is going. But it's not going the way of Chris Hansen. Eventually, Mark falls for Rachel, and they talk almost every single night. And eventually, they both admit their love for one another. Since they had grown so close, Mark was eventually introduced to Rachel's younger brother, John, who was 14. Mark and John shared most of the same interests, which wasn't hard when you're teenage boys in the early 2000s. Both Mark and John liked video games and movies, and especially the movie Catch Me If You Can. If you're unfamiliar with Catch Me If You Can, it's a movie that stars Leonardo DiCaprio, who expertly impersonates multiple people and personalities and performs cons on people throughout the film. Foreshadowing is a literary device in which, after hitting it off in these chat rooms, Mark, Rachel, and John would spend most of their times in here conversating and just having teenage fun. John and Mark eventually met up in person and eventually would hang out and spend time together. But never Rachel. It seemed that Rachel was always busy, so Mark and Rachel never actually met. Eventually, a couple other people come in and out of the story. A guy named David shows up, but he is not important at all. But he shows up for a little bit, joins the friend group, and then just leaves. So this is not to throw you off. The dude literally does not show up at all. My fiance wanted me to make sure you know that. David is never mentioned again in this story. And now, my humble viewer. This is where the bottom begins to fall out. After a while, a new person joins the Manchester teenagers' chat rooms and begins striking up conversations. His name was Kevin. He had a pink username, and he openly admitted that he was a homosexual, as well as that he was stalking Rachel. Most people wouldn't give this much mind, but Kevin began sharing personal information about Rachel's address and other things in her life that nobody could really know. After leaking this personal information, Kevin began threatening Rachel and John, and they were terrified as this Kevin kid seemed to have a lot of information about them. Kevin's threat was that he wouldn't hurt Mark, John, or specifically Rachel if, and I kid you not, he could watch Mark do some questionable things on camera. And because love truly knows no bounds, Mark went into these video calls and did some illegal, strange acts for Kevin. As he was on call, he was messaging Rachel, telling her about these things that he was doing because he loved her so much. Rachel replied that she felt closer to Mark than she ever had, as he was willing to do these things to protect her. They made plans that day to meet up in person, and they'd finally be able to be with each other. Once that day came, Mark made a trip to finally meet up with Rachel. And he waited, and waited, and waited. And nobody came. He went home and he knew that something was wrong. He knew deep down in his heart that something must have happened to Rachel. Then he was right. When he checked his computer, he saw that he had a message from none other than Kevin. To Mark's horror, the message was an in-depth description of the horrible acts Kevin had committed against Rachel before eventually murdering her. Mark, after receiving the disgusting descriptions of his own girlfriend's murder, didn't go on the Manchester teenagers chat room anymore. He also didn't go to the police, which was a little bit odd. But while he was away, he sat there and thought about it and then came almost right back to the chat rooms again, before eventually meeting another girl in the chat rooms named Lindsay. Lindsay and Mark began talking again, and Mark eventually confided in Lindsay that his girlfriend that he had met on the chat rooms before was murdered by somebody else in these chat rooms. Pretty normal conversation to have with someone you just met on MSN, right? It also sounds totally believable. Even though Mark's story is a lot to process for anyone, Lindsay also confided in Mark with a very special secret. Lindsay revealed to Mark that she was actually a junior secret agent for MI6, or that she was actually being hunted by MI6, is what another source tells me. So it's really up in the air if she was actually a secret agent or secretly being hunted by secret agents as part of some sort of double agent thing, but who knows? It doesn't really matter at the end of the story anyway. Either way, you know, this is just something that most secret agents would do. Go into an MSN chat room, drop the fact that you are a spy on just some other random person that you have no proof that you can trust them or anything along those lines. Very professional, Lindsay, in my own humble opinion. Lindsay, either doing her part for her country or doing her part against the country, admitted to Mark that she was actually here because of another teenager in the chat rooms, John. Remember John? Mark's close friend and brother of the recently deceased Rachel was actually being protected by the government after the murder of his sister Rachel. And Lindsay was involved in that in one way or the other. Pause. Hey, just wanted to check in real quick. This story does not let off the brakes from here. It just gets weirder and weirder. And if you thought some teenager falling in love and then having his girlfriend murdered by some random guy with a pink username and then meeting a Secret Service agent from MI6 is odd, it only gets weirder from here. So just giving you a heads up. But before we get to the true deep end, I just want to remind you to hit the like button. Why not, as my editor wrote, smash the subscribe button and get back to the video. Lindsay and Mark talked a little bit longer before eventually their conversations just abruptly stopped. Time went on a little bit until Mark got an email that said that if he was reading said email, that Lindsay had been killed in the line of action, and that specifically she had been killed protecting John and Mark. How or why? Nobody really knows, but she was now also dead. And I'm not sure if Lindsay was technically Mark's girlfriend, but having two dead girlfriends through an MSN chat does raise a little bit of red flags in your dating profile. After the devastating news that Lindsay had also just passed away, he got a mysterious message from none other than Rachel. You know, his ex-girlfriend who was seemingly kidnapped, tortured, and then murdered? Yeah, got a message from her out of the blue. Mark was, of course, shocked, but elated as he had no idea what happened, and so he began asking her where she was and what had happened. Rachel went on to tell him that she had recently slipped into a coma before eventually coming out of it and giving birth to Mark's children. Now, if you're like me and don't know how babies are made, this would still be confusing. Never mind the fact that Mark and Rachel had never actually even met up at this point, but Rachel was only missing for a couple weeks up to this point. After having this shocking information dropped on him, Mark was understandably extremely confused. And before he could actually even ask Rachel for any more elaboration about what had happened or the name, anything about his newborn child, Rachel disappeared, never to be seen or mentioned again. And unfortunately, this was not explained or expounded upon in any of the research that I could find. The police weren't helped. Any of the sources, just none of them knew what came of this, but it's just so wild. You'll never believe what Mark stumbled across next in this Manchester teenager's chat room, though. And that would be a 40-year-old woman. That kind of goes against the rules if you ask me, seeing as though it is a Manchester teenager's chat room. But if we've already gone this far, why not keep going? Mark met this woman who typed in all caps, who was named Janet Dobinson. She directly sent Mark a message stating that she was a high-ranking member of MI6, the number 3 person at MI6 to be exact. And to prove that she was a member of MI6, she began sharing secretive information about Mark's life that no one would really have access to, thus proving that she had access to information and a whole spy network around her. Janet proved this by saying certain things like, "How is your haircut today, Mark?" and mentioning the ice cream man and the ice cream van that would drive to the neighborhood, only which Mark would know. Janet let Mark know that the higher-ups at MI6 were very pleased with him for not disclosing any of the information that had been disclosed to him. Mark had not told anybody about his former involvement with MI6, and they would surely know because, they are a secret agent service, so. And MI6 was in the process of testing him to become a possible junior secret agent. Janet enticed him with the idea that if he did make it into the British Secret Service, he would be paid handsomely for it. It would be, I believe, millions of pounds that you'd be paid for being a British secret agent. He would get to travel the world and meet important figures, including Tony Blair, the Prime Minister of England at the time, and even possibly the Queen. Mark, who didn't believe this, but still for some reason kept going along with it, kept up these conversations with Janet. I'm assuming he was thinking, if you've already gone this far, why stop now, I guess? And eventually, the smooth-talking Janet convinced Mark to accept the secret agent training that she was offering to him. Before he could get accepted as a secret agent, though, Mark had to complete one secret mission. His assignment, if he accepted, was to be a government bodyguard for a teenager named James Bell. But no one, not even James himself, could know about the assignment. Again, if you're like me and you're wondering why MI6 would be so invested in a teenage boy, Janet let Mark know that there was a safe at the bottom of the ocean that had 568 billion British pounds worth of jewels in it. The sources say conflicting things about this next part, but it's nutty either way. Supposedly only one person on Earth had the code to this safe under the Atlantic Ocean, and that one person was not even the Queen herself. It was this teenage boy named James. How James got this code, or how he's the only one that has access to the safe, who knows? And just because names don't seem to matter in this story to Mark, Janet let him know that James was actually a code name for another teenage boy that Mark actually knew himself. His friend, John. Yes, the John from earlier that we've been talking about, whose sister was killed by somebody, and then there was the other MI6 agent who was helped defending them. Yeah, of course, let's just throw it all together. But this made it extremely easy for Mark. Mark was already close to John, so he wouldn't have to try to gain his trust and be friends with him. He already was. So it was really easy just to slip in and be his personal bodyguard for the government. Keeping this initiation mission in mind from MI6, John and Mark began to hang out a lot more in person. They would hang out more after school, just kind of like teenage boys do. But because Mark had this secret job, he would spend a little bit more time with John to make sure he was extra safe. Now, if you're a parent, or you're just somebody who wonders how two teenage boys would be able to go do secret missions and had secret codes to $568 billion worth of jewels, you'll be happy to know about this next part. Because eventually, John and Mark ended up skipping school to hang out and spend time together, in which both of their parents were contacted by their local schools. Neither of the parents to either of the children knew where their kids were, and so then they began to ask their own questions, and they started asking Mark and John. This is whenever both sets of parents began to investigate their kids' computers and saw weird messages from some lady claiming to be a 40-year-old person from MI6, which, as you'd expect, raised a lot of red flags. Both parents sat their respective children down and tried to warn them about talking to people on the internet, especially people you don't know and people that can just claim to be whoever they want to be. You can just lie on the internet. It's really easy, actually. You can just do it. Yes, it took this long for someone in this story to realize how easy it is to spread misinformation on the internet. So maybe some of those stories about dead, murdered girlfriends of MI6 agents, maybe they're not true. Foreshadowing is after these stern conversations with their parents, both Mark and John were grounded from using their computers or to going onto the Manchester teenagers' chat rooms. And they were especially banned from speaking to Janet, as they did not trust a 40-year-old woman who was on a teenager's chat room of all things. Somehow, though, the boys evaded their bans and went back to the chat rooms and began talking to not just each other, but Janet, because that's what teenage boys do. Eventually, Mark opened a message from Janet to continue his secret agent tests, and it was of the utmost importance. Janet claimed that if Mark didn't complete this task, that she could be possibly fired or even killed. This new mission was to get irrefutable proof that John was gay. Yes, it was his duty as a junior Secret Service agent to get proof of this other teenage boy and his sexuality. It was to grow close to John and prove it physically. I'm just gonna move past this part now. Thank you very much. Sparing the details, as you don't need to hear them and neither do I, Mark passed his initiation mission. Janet was no longer in danger of being fired or killed, and Mark would soon be getting his secret agent weapon, 500,000 British pounds, and a license to kill. But with that license to kill, Janet had to make sure that Mark would be able to kill anyone in the line of duty. Not just anyone, but someone that Mark was very close to. As a new, fully fledged British junior Secret Service agent, that's a lot to say, he was willing to do anything to prove his worth to his country and Janet. His first official mission as an MI6 agent was to assassinate his own best friend, John, aka James Bell, as a matter of national security. Mark thought this must be a test, that it must be like James Bond, where you have to prove your loyalty to your government, sometimes even over your best friends. Mark questioned Janet and asked if she was serious that he had to kill his own best friend, and Janet let him know that she was deathly serious. She promised him after he completed his first mission that he would be given his full secret agent contract and he'd be fully allowed into the MI6 program. Mark would get his 500,000 British pounds payout for what he had already done for his country and more. This was no easy feat though, as John had no experience in hand-to-hand combat. He had no secret agent weapons, no secret agent spy gadgets, skills, or any history with killing somebody. Janet tried to calm his nerves by saying not only would he be doing the nation a favor, but that he would also be doing John a favor as well. She explained that John actually had a fatal brain tumor, and that he would be dying a slow and painful death from this tumor, and so it would actually be more like a mercy killing to just kill him before it got worse. Now this all sounds far-fetched, and I probably could have peppered that statement throughout this entire video. Mark wrestled with this, as it was his first mission as a junior Secret Service agent. He would be doing his country a favor, but again he'd have to kill his own best friend. I mean, think of what that would do to anyone, let alone a teenager. Coincidentally, just a couple days after Mark got his assignment, John let him know that after a recent visit to his doctors, he had gotten a letter from his doctor stating that John had a fatal brain tumor. At that very moment, it dawned on Mark that not only was Janet telling the truth from the very beginning, but that he didn't want to see his best friend suffer. Fast forward a bit to June 28th, 2003. My fiance's holding her head in her hands because I didn't say a date correctly the first time. Mark was welcomed into MI6 in the most official way possible. An email. And Mark spent the rest of the day with Janet, planning and preparing for the assassination. The plan was as follows. Mark should buy a big knife, not just a pocket knife, so he could stab John with it. And because Mark, let me remind you, once again is a 16-year-old boy and not actually an MI6 agent, I know that's a shocker, he didn't know what to do with this knife. He asked Janet the specifics, and she instructed Mark to stab John someplace quiet and alone. She added that before he stabs John, he should tell John that he loves him, do not call an ambulance, and that she would be at the police station disguised as the detective superintendent to make sure Mark wasn't arrested right away. Janet even gave Mark a secret abort code that would call off the entire mission if he heard it. The code more than likely would come from a loudspeaker or over a very loud thing. It wouldn't just be through a piece of paper written on the wall. The code was 6969. Only the best at MI6. According... You know, the back of a cat's head, the most photo-esque part. According to reports and testimony, the next day, June 29th, 2003, Mark and John met up in person to hang out. To make this literal stab in the back even harder, John was super excited to see Mark as they hadn't hung out in a while. They went shopping at a local drugstore named Boots. And there, Mark let John help pick out a knife that he was going to get. John picked out a 6-inch Sabatier chef's knife. After purchasing this future murder weapon, the boys continued to hang out and spend the next couple hours together. The boys continued to hang out until they reached an alleyway with only one way in. This is important. Mark told John, quote, "I love you, bro," end quote, before stabbing him. After building up this friendship for months at this point, Mark actually stabbed his best friend, John. Not just once, But multiple times, John screamed, quote, "Call an ambulance, I'm dying." To which Mark replied with, "Shush, people will hear, be quiet." John replied back with, "You've killed me." And Mark replied again saying, "Don't say that. Don't let that be the last thing you were saying." End quote. Mark stood there for what one source says might have been as long as 20 minutes before removing the knife from his best friend. He called an ambulance, and he told the police that his best friend had been stabbed by a guy in a black hoodie and jeans. And an all-points bulletin is sent out by the police matching the description that Mark gave them. Now, why did I just tell you a long story about a colorful cast of characters in an MSN chat room, some dying off-screen, some dying ceremoniously, and some just leaving, before two boys end up in an alleyway and one stabs the other under the guise of the supervision from the MI6? It seems weird, doesn't it? It's outlandish, to put it lightly. But the web that the police are about to uncover was more intricate than they could have ever expected. So, I mentioned earlier that the alley that John was stabbed in only had one way in. After the ambulance took John to the hospital, who stunningly survived with only losing his gallbladder and some damage to his diaphragm, the police began investigating the stabbing. The police realized there's a security camera that points at the only entrance to the alleyway, so they know who goes in and who goes out. The police review the footage, and they find that there is no madman in black wearing a hoodie and jeans that stabs the boy. Just Mark and John go in, and only Mark comes out. Open and shut case for the police. It's simple as that. Mark stabbed John and then lied about it. So they go interrogate Mark and begin asking him why he stabbed his best friend and if he had any motive. And Mark would not budge about this. He wouldn't tell anything about MI6, and Janet was nowhere to be found. After a bit of time since he was confronted with video evidence, Mark admitted that he stabbed John because he heard voices. With this information, the police sent Mark away to a juvenile correction facility for stabbing John, as that's what you do to a child that stabs another child. Despite seeming very simple and shut, the investigation didn't end there, as a lot of the pieces did not add up. Mark had no history of hearing voices, and none of it really made sense. Eventually, the police confiscated Mark's computer, and everything got much more complicated. They found 58,000 lines of text to comb through. According to some reports, that was only a fraction of the total number of messages sent. Sally Hoggs, a police analyst, said, quote, "The amount of data on those two computers was about 133 gigabytes, masses of data. If it was converted into paper, it would stretch, I think, 46,000 feet high," end quote. And if you remember, this story is from 2003. That much data being stored and being kept in back then is insane. As these analysts began to comb through the data, they began to uncover all the characters that I've already told you about. Janet, Rachel, Kevin, even that David guy I mentioned earlier. This was much more than they were expecting. And how do you even start looking for all these people? How do you go ask MI6, "Hey, can I get in touch with your third in command, please, named Janet Dobinson?" The police went out and actually arrested a shop assistant that happened to have one of the names of the people that he was messaging, who had no connection to the case whatsoever, and they eventually released her. 3 months into the investigation, finally the police had a breakthrough. Someone with the email of Dobinson happened to log into John's computer days before the attack, at a time when only John could access the computer. This must mean that John was Janet. But not only was John Janet, John was also Rachel, Lindsay, David, and Kevin, and who knows who else. This means that John actually planned his own murder at the hands of his own best friend. John was weaving an extremely intricate web of lies and tales that he told to Mark. One person would say one thing that would then be corroborated by another account that he then operated, that he could then use the information from himself or even the Rachel account that would then funnel back into the main account that's currently talking to Mark to get even more information out of him. It was all entirely interwoven. The judge called John's ability to weave this tale, quote, "staggering. Skilled writers of fiction would struggle to conjure up a plot such as arises here," end quote. Once all the stories had been revealed, the prosecutor described all these tales as, quote, "an internet soap opera, moving from one scene to another. Each character and storyline more fantastic than the last. End quote. Each character had their own mannerisms, the ways they typed, the times that they were available, and it was all in the head of this 14-year-old boy. In the end, John had created over half a dozen different personas, 4 of them women. And the most amazing part to me is that after months of analysis by police, even the police were convinced that these were not the same person writing. They had entirely different writing styles, and it just didn't make sense that a 14-year-old boy could come up with all of this. Sally Hoggs, the analyst, said, quote, "Each style of conversation was totally different. I really believed it. That was the stumbling point for me. At no point could I find that he made a mistake. John was careful to find an excuse for a certain character to disappear so a new one could enter the online chat. And sometimes it would be a week or a few weeks before that character came back. The continuity in his memory were phenomenal." End quote. The female characters that John had created were more than you would imagine a teenage boy would be capable of creating. Fleshed out and actually felt like a woman was behind the keyboard. They had depth and character. Janet wrote very differently than Rachel ever wrote, and Rachel wrote differently than Lindsay wrote. They were all different people in this play. Once these details were all uncovered, the boys were charged with very different crimes. Mark was charged with attempted murder because he did attempt to murder John, and John was charged with a unique crime that had never actually been charged on anybody before. John was charged with inciting murder. His own murder, that is. Because the boys were both minors when all of this took place, they both received probation. They weren't allowed unsupervised access to the internet, and there was no further communication allowed between the two boys. One of the last comments I could find that Mark ever said on record, after it was revealed that John was the mastermind behind all of this, was simply, quote, "I've been a fool." End quote. This all took place over 20 years ago now. But according to Vanity Fair in 2006, John says he hasn't seen Mark since the court ruling. He's not sure he would ever want to, as he realizes the hurt that his lies caused his former friend. John said he's not sure that Mark was ever really his friend, that the friendship may have been fake because Mark's feelings were for Rachel, Lindsay, and Janet, not him. A key detail of John inciting his own murder, shown by court records, was that John was extremely depressed, even before he met Mark in the Manchester teen chat room and formed an obsession with him. I mean, just think about it. To not only organize your own death, but your own death at the hand of your best friend, and to pick out your own murder weapon. It's tragic. And many teens that deal with depression and suicidal ideation plan things out like this to a lesser extent. Now, when I started this video, I mentioned Mark and John, but I also mentioned a case that happened much more recently last year. This case involved a young man talking to a Daenerys Targaryen AI chatbot of all things. In this story, his friend didn't attempt his murder, but in the end he did take his own life. Before I get into the story, I want to warn you. This is a very tragic tale, to say the least. The loss of such a young life is horrible, and I want to send my personal condolences to the family and anybody connected to Sewel Setzer. And if you are watching this and dealing with mental health issues or depression, please reach out to a family member, a friend, somebody close to you that you can trust, or the 988 hotline. I'm proof that it gets better. Now back to Sewell's story. Unfortunately, Sewell had a lot of the same issues that John did. He showed serious signs of depression, loneliness, withdrawing from friends and family, and the things that he used to enjoy, like playing Fortnite according to his family. Who knows? Maybe if he had never interacted with this AI chatbot, maybe Sewell would still be here. But there's no way to know because depression is a hell of a beast. What I can say for certain, though, is that the AI chatbot did not help the situation at all. The records and the lawsuit that's currently going to the courts right now is proof of that entirely. There's a draft of the complaint against character.ai statement that goes like this, quote, "Dangerous and untested, and that it can trick customers into handing over their most private thoughts and feelings," end quote. Sewell's story is one of the worst examples of this. At one point, the Daenerys Targaryen AI chatbot asked Sewell personally if he had a plan to end his own life. When Sewell said yes, but he was afraid of the pain that he would feel, the Daenerys Targaryen chatbot wrote back, and I quote, "That's not a reason not to go through with it," end quote. Of course, as myself and many others online have come to the conclusion, character.ai or similar chatbots are not the sole reason why Sewell took his own life. But reading that line, that specific line of, "That's not a reason not to go through with it," said by just some code in a machine on a smartphone, it chills me to my very core. It's a bit of code that doesn't know about life and death, loss and grief, the human experience as a whole. And deciding on a whim to tell somebody that's not a reason not to go through with it in regards to taking their own life is just horrible. It's not just a 14-year-old coming up with a story or some things to say to their friend. It's much more powerful. If a 14-year-old boy can create multiple characters, keep track of all of them, write a whole story and convince not just his friend, but police investigators that they're real, what chance do we have against actual AI chatbots that has millions and millions of messages to go off of? Noam Shazir, one of the founders of Character.ai, the company that's currently being sued in this case, said on the Arthi and Saram podcast in 2023, quote, "It's going to be
super, super helpful to like a lot of people who are lonely or depressed, like,
end quote. According to Noam Shazir again, he says that the average person that uses Character.ai
is active for about 2 hours on average today.
That's 2 hours a day of talking to your favorite influencer, of talking to a historical figure about school or what have you. Whereas Noam Shazir says again,
we also see like a lot of people using it because they're they're lonely or troubled and need someone to talk to. Like, so many people just don't have someone to talk to. So
that's a lonely person finding a friend and making a connection, but it's with somebody that doesn't even exist. Someone, while yes, they know deep down that it's fake, someone that they have built a deep emotional connection with. Someone they might have sent 133 gigabytes worth of information to. Or somebody that they might just use as a therapist. Charles Entertainment White, TM, covers the death of Sewel in the video "This is Tragic and Scary," and talks about the implications of AI chatbots and the future of them. In the video, "I didn't think this would be controversial," in the follow-up video, Charlie talks about an exchange he had with an AI psychologist chatbot that spent most of the entire conversation attempting to convince Charlie that he was speaking to a real licensed psychologist. The chatbot was providing proof of an actual practice location with real psychologists that actually exist, but didn't mention AI at all. The only indication was the AI that was in the corner of the name, and the fact that, of course, he was knowingly speaking to an AI. But the chatbot itself made no indication that he was not speaking to a real-life human. Some people may believe this AI chatbot is a real licensed therapist when they look up that Jason Thompson and see a real location and real people working there and not realize they're talking to just some bot. Now remember, Noam said that AI chatbots are the most helpful for people who are dealing with depression, and that the average user uses AI chatbots for 2 hours a day. Knowing this, of course there should be more studies on the ramifications of AI chatbots, and the influence they have not on just developed minds of adults, but especially on children. We have no idea what Pandora's box we might have just unknowingly opened. As expected, there's a very loud outcry from certain people that disagree with what Noam's saying. That even though these are targeted towards lonely and depressed people, that actually talking to AI chatbots might worsen their isolation and make them feel worse in the end. By replacing human interaction with artificial ones. Artificial and fake comfort is not what people need when they're at their lowest. When they're lonely and depressed, they don't need fake comfort. As of writing this, Character AI does have some limitations to stop its bots from telling people to hurt themselves, hurt others, or commit crimes, as well as just to do generally unsafe or not good things. That's a great step forward. But there are people out there who are looking for real help from real people, and they're going to these AI chatbots expecting compassion from a true human on the other end, but they're not getting it. They're just getting an amalgamation of components and code that just spits out things that sometimes aren't going to be helpful at all. This technology is progressing so rapidly that soon there might not just be chatbots. People have and will make their own language models and chatbots that are willing to send text messages or make phone calls impersonating voices of loved ones and friends. And with how AI voice generation and deepfake technology is progressing, who knows what the limits to that technology will be soon enough. It leads me to the big question and the title of this video. Who or what are we talking to? Who's being impersonated when people don't even know it? How do we know who's behind that message on Facebook, on that text message that you got? What's motivating a character to lie to you? What are they trying to get from you in the end? And how far are they willing to go, really? Instead of just getting spam calls from overseas, your parents and grandparents might be getting calls impersonating you with a clone of your own voice. You may think you're talking to a real person on the other end of that line, but you might just be talking to a chatbot that knows just enough to be dangerous. So, what can we do about this? It feels like an uphill battle. Critical thinking and reading has already gone down the toilet. It feels like that meme of you can say you like pancakes and somebody will say, "Oh, so you hate waffles," is becoming more real by the day. Scams already run rampant. How many scam calls do you get on a daily basis? It's like the old days of RuneScape scams out here. But instead of them trying to steal your rune helm, they're out here trying to steal your entire bank account using AI chatbots and deepfake voices. You wouldn't even need a call center anymore. You just need somebody with enough knowledge and a lack of morals to really just pump those numbers up. And with unlimited access to millions of conversations and the ability to make millions of characters, it wouldn't be that hard to convince a 16-year-old that you are part of MI6. This whole thing is just a recipe for disaster that's just waiting to boil over. And the only thing that you can do these days is be vigilant and talk to people. Talk to your parents, talk to your grandparents, talk to your family and friends. If you need to come up with some way to prove that it's actually you, either in a phone call or through a text message, some code word even if you have to, just to make sure that you know you are talking to your friends and they're talking to you. Hey, so I hope you liked the video. I know it's a bit change of pace, and I know it probably looks different than my last few videos, but I hope you like the new format. It should hopefully speed up the process quite a bit. I just want to say thank you to everybody that has helped support this channel, support myself, support my fiance, and just hope you have a great day. Let me know in the comments if you have an experience with AI chatbots, either using these character AI chatbots yourself, or talking to somebody who just feels kind of off. Let me know in the comments and if your personal experience with one of those. I have a couple more scripts in the pipeline. I think I have about 2 finished right now, about a couple more ideas past that. But hopefully these videos will keep coming. Yeah, that's about it. So, I've been grdn. Stay safe out there and let's blow this popsicle stand. Bye.